The label we put on it as we walk through this season together. We wanted to make the lessons, teachings, articulation of what we've learned as followers of Jesus in recovery very available to all the people of Venture Church as we walk out this season, a season that is very different than what we're used to, a season that has us in situations and contexts that are existentially situated, where these lessons of recovery become very valuable because frankly, we find that the whole world right now is in a space of recovery. And so the point is that this is yours. The intent here is to be of value to you in your walk as you wrestle with, deal, articulate, and address becoming exactly who the person of Jesus instructs you to be. Our hope is that as you walk with us, not so much that you do, say, think, or agree, or do the things that I or we or any of us do, but that you're enabled in your own walk to be the Christ follower that God calls you to be, and in that be able to serve yet more people down the path. So this is yours. And before we go any further, my name is Daniel. I'm a grateful believer, and I struggle with addiction and anxiety, and it is a privilege to be here with you today. And so this space, our Monday nights, we articulate back and forth between a teaching and a testimony. And this week we have a testimony, and I'm kind of excited about this one. They're always different. Each testimony, and I say this essentially every time, but it's just so true, especially as we walk into more and more and more cultural division, that we choose unity again and again and again, to choose unity. And so tonight you're going to hear a story, and surprise, it's not your story. It's the story of a human being that matters to me very much. And they won't have done what you did. And they won't have the exact same problems that you do. And it would be so easy, maybe a different gender than you, or different economic circumstances. It's so easy to look at the things that are different. And more than ever before, I just want to encourage you to grab on the things that are the same. We all wrestle with choice. We all get stuff wrong. We all of us, by virtue of the fact that we're here, that we're willing to humble down or humble up enough to look at something called Celebrate Recovery or Recovering Hope, we're all starting and trying to deal with that. And so as you hear this person share their story, I want to encourage you, look for those similarities. Look for what unites you, especially if they're different. There could be something incredibly valuable for you there. And then afterwards, as we split up into small groups, take that with you and share and take a step further. You know, today's Memorial Day, and it is all about honoring those who came before us with sacrifice to give that we might receive or know freedom. You know, there's something very, very real as Christ as the primary example of that in this universe. And there's something very small and very similar in the space that anyone that's willing to share their testimony is doing that to some extent. They're giving you their weakness. So on this day of honoring and remembering, I would ask you to honor and remember the person that's going to give their testimony today in just a small way, not in a big way, and just go into small groups and then give a little slice of your story to someone else. Take a step of faith, share something from your own heart, and see what God does with that in someone else's life. And just watch. Watch as he does the same in your own. It is so dependable. It's amazing. And this is the power of testimony. This is the power of God's grace. This is the story of freedom in our lives. And it is a privilege to share this one with you.
Hi. I am a grateful believer celebrating victory over codependency, relationship addiction, and anxiety. I am currently working on stopping the vicious circle of fury, staying obedient to God's will, and becoming slow to anger. And my name is Maria. I was born in a small town of Spain to loving and caring parents. I was the youngest of 8 siblings. When I was born, my mom was nearly 40 and my dad nearly 50, and they were not living a life of raising little kids anymore. My oldest sibling was 18 and in college, and 5 more siblings followed closely in age, between 1 and 2 years apart. The good and the bad of having so many older siblings is that they were by any practical means like having aunties or uncles, which created the perfect environment to get spoiled. Before I turned 3 years old, we moved to a very touristic town called Benidorm along the Mediterranean coast. The closest thing I could come up to describe this town is imagine if a Spanish version of Las Vegas and LA had a baby. That would be neither. Anyway, I was a sweet little girl growing up. At least people would tell me, as my memory serves as well. I was fairly calm and obedient, even mellow. But somewhere along the way, this sweet little girl became anxious, hungry, and rebellious. I'd imagine a lot of kids out there are like I was. They don't necessarily experience anything dramatic as they grow up, yet all families are inherently broken. We all get disappointed, hurt. We learn some habits along the way. Or perhaps we dealt with perfectionism and the need for everything to feel just right. I was spoiled with a load of good things. The burden of a perfect little life with no big worries ahead of me. I was loved and cared for. Lots of family to pour love on me. We had enough money to have a great house growing up and everything else we wanted it. What else could I hope for? I wanted everything, and I wanted more. I wanted a movie-perfect life. I had a religious upbringing, and we were a traditional Catholic family in the modern world. I went to Catholic middle school and then went to public high school. My parents would take us to church every Sunday, and we would say grace before lunch, all in this meal for whatever reason, and we would recite the same old prayer at bedtime. When stressful things happened, my mom would usually light a candle to the Virgin and recited some prayers. Though my dad would talk about Jesus often, the message of love and hope, they seemed to get lost in the midst of the formalities, and church appeared very contrived. I didn't know what a relationship with Jesus was about. I never even heard about that. I don't have memories of having serious conversations with my parents about our feelings or emotions. I don't even remember my mom or dad talking about how they felt about things with us or in between themselves. I do remember, on the other hand, when my mom was angry or unhappy. There was often something she was unhappy about, and she would let us know. I was exposed to a lot of criticism growing up. That seemed to be the way my mom expressed her feelings and thoughts for the most part. Though she would also be very expressive with signs of affection, she was and still is very intense. My dad passed away in 2011 from Alzheimer's complication. He was quiet and a gentleman, an undemanding father. He knew the Lord, and in his last days, he would only find comfort when someone would read him Bible verses and he would smile. I was reminded of when he used to talk to me about Jesus growing up, but I was too self-absorbed back then to even listen. I will never forget some of the last words I heard from him in person. Ay, es mi niña malita. This is my little bad girl. He said that when he could not remember my name anymore, but he still knew who I was to him, and he still loved me. He said this while grinning at me with his sweet smile and wanting to come and snuggle in his arms. My biggest regret is that he didn't get to see me baptized or see my new life by choosing to follow God soon after his death. He had planted a seed in me long, long before. I just didn't know it yet. So rewinding a little, I grew up spoiled by goodness, becoming a self-absorbed teenager. And around this time, my mom said something I have never forgotten. She said something along these lines: "You are the worst of my three daughters, of the three sisters, and you have got nothing good like your old sisters. You only got the defects." Well, these words became ingrained and embedded in my brain and my heart. That was the moment that I can trace back, those words that turn into a sharp, invisible knife that pierced my heart through and through, and that's when I recall my anger being rooted, and I became rebellious. I was like a switch. I became wild. Well, to heck with being good or trying to. Since I was so bad, why shouldn't I lead a real bad life? That's when I started dating the wrong guys, spending most of my time with other self-absorbed people. I started smoking just to get some attention. Then soon after came alcohol, things like that. After failing all my classes, I barely stepped on the school grounds for my sophomore year. because I was so busy educating myself with playing pool and riding motorbikes with boys. My mom gave me an ultimatum that I would get my grades up or she would send me to the USA with my sister and her ex-marine husband. And I thought, heck yes, I'm going to the United States. That year, I actually got a bit of Jesus from my sister and her husband. It was good for me, and I did better that year, earning really good grades and staying in school. But when I went back to Spain, I ended up losing a lot of those good habits, and I was going nowhere. I became ambitionless and decided I didn't need to go to college for now, so I could just work. I treated boys as disposable, and then spent 3 years in a fruitless relationship that I wanted to end, but I didn't know how to. So I decided I wanted to go visit my sister again back in the USA. This was 8 years later. In the States, I immediately started dating my sister's brother-in-law. That's right, my sister's husband's brother. At the end of my 3 weeks of vacation, he proposed, and I said yes. I came back to Spain with an engagement ring in my finger, and I technically still had a boyfriend. Let me spare you the drama details that went with that. So moving along, I married my brother-in-law's brother, Scott, within 6 months of dating, and I moved to the United States after the wedding. It looks like my movie-like story was actually going to happen. I thought surely things would be better now, right? I had left my old crazy life, and I married a mature person. Scott was 8 years older than me. He lived a fairly easygoing life, had a good solid job with healthy ambitions, and he adored me. But only a few months after we got married, I became depressed, and I realized that this marriage wasn't what I thought it would be. I wanted my movie. It was then 15 years ago that I met Daniel. He was one of my instructors at school. I was drawn to him like an unstoppable magnetic force, and going to the point, we ended up having an affair. My marriage was over at that point. I knew it deep inside. I wanted a marriage with passion, adventure, romance. Isn't that what marriage is supposed to be? Well, that's what I keep hearing and seeing in movies, and what I foolishly believed. We had no God. We didn't know Jesus at all. And so it was all left to this desire to fulfill this need of feeling love and loving back. But we didn't know how. In the midst of this, Daniel ended our affair, having had a radical encounter with Jesus, and his conviction was too great as to continue this. But I was still married, heartbroken, and terribly unhappy. I was so self-absorbed. I couldn't see beyond my own desires and my own pain. What about what I was putting Scott through? I didn't think Scott loved me enough, so I excused my actions and found ways to victimize myself as to allow myself to have these feelings. Eventually, we separated and divorced. I got a hold of Daniel sometimes afterwards, and we started dating. We started to go to church together, and even though I wasn't quite a believer yet, I found myself drawn to come back. So I was there every Sunday. I finally heard the gospel for the first time. Some of the things my dad used to say began to make sense, and they were becoming real. I know God was really trying to get my attention, and I felt my heart getting softer. Within 2 years, we got married, and this time, God was part of it. But to be honest, I hadn't fully accepted Jesus yet. I was scared of giving up control for my life. Which is funny, since I obviously didn't have any good grip of it, but I didn't know how to do so. My dad was already sick with Alzheimer's, and the progress was really fast. He wasn't able to come to the wedding and barely realized what was going on. My dad passed, and this was my first real life traumatic experience. But because God had been softening my heart, I saw God hard, and for the very first time in my life, I really needed him. I needed to fully believe Jesus died for us and that my dad's faith wasn't for nothing. Soon after, on a sunny day in the park, I was reading this little book that my sister had given me, and it was all about why it is easier to believe in Jesus than not. And something clicked. I finally realized, even though this was a very convincing little book, that I could always, every time, find excuses to not believe. This was about me making the choice to have faith. I had to choose it. I had to take that first step. So right then and there, I did. I finally got baptized on the anniversary after my dad passed. All the while, my husband found himself deep in drug and sexual addiction, and I became the codependent spouse. I had enough. I wasn't blameless by any means, but I wasn't equipped to deal with this stuff, and I became a very angry person. I lost all sense of myself until one day enough was enough, and I left him. Cold turkey. I gave him one last chance to tell me the truth once and for all, and so that we could try and solve this situation. But God had another plan. This is when I finally realized I was powerless to fix my marriage. So I went to live with my sister and her family again, and I made it clear to him that we were done. I was nearly losing my mind at this point, and the thunders came, literally, as I was pulling out the driveway. This is when the real journey for growth in my faith starts. This was day one. I was a newborn. I began to understand that I couldn't rely on anyone the way I did, not even my husband, and that I was completely powerless about the circumstances. God showed me his fatherly love for me, and I started to let go of my husband and sought comfort in him. I was learning to put my faith on God, and at this very moment is when a friend recommended CR. So, while looking for people to talk to and a cure for my husband, I decided half-heartedly go to CR. At first, I hated it. I did not feel like I belonged. My thoughts were, oh dear, well, these people have real issues. But me, well, my real issue is just my husband. If he can be fixed, then everything will be well in my life. But I kept coming. I really wanted to feel understood by other human beings. At CR, I could speak about my struggles with other Christian people who could pray for me and with me without feeling judged. But I kept trying to understand what the real meaning of all of this was. It was around this time that I finally understood with my heart Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all things submit to him, and he will make all your paths straight. So I kept putting my trust in God, and I kept coming to CR. And little by little, God started revealing things to me. And the pieces started to click. Oh, wait. I have felt like that. Oh, wait. I do this type of thing. Or shoot, I have anger issues. Oh, wait a second. Am I a codependent person? And then the realization of denial hits. Denial was real. This is where I have been living for years. During these weeks, God and I were working hard. I grew more in this month and a half than in my entire adulthood. I was constantly surrounded by people who could relate or would be truly interested in my issues, and they earnestly wanted to help me. I lived with my sister and brother-in-law, just the same ones that when I was 15 years old, and they were amazingly understanding. They were supporting and loving, not just with me, but also with my husband. My sister's family, the people of CR, and my pastors is what literally sustained me when I couldn't take care of myself. God was so present, and he showed up. I could hear him through these people, and then when I would read my Bible and pray, he was louder than ever. What I know now is that I was never alone. He was always there, even when I was a foolish girl getting in trouble, yet I didn't hear him until I became so desperate for him. The noises of this world are so loud, his voice so gentle, and me so preoccupied with taking control of things that I hadn't realized he had been there all along. All I had to do was to stop and seek him. Soon after, I joined a step study. With the first lesson, the blinders were finally off. My life had been so unmanageable for so many years. How was it possible that I was so blind and for so long? This whole process, this whole journey, wasn't about my husband or my ex or any other guy that would ever come into my life. No man would ever be enough or be able to compete with my needs, even if he was movie perfect. In the meantime, my husband had been working with God since the moment I left to my sisters. He touched his own bottom and decided to go into treatment and dealt shamelessly with his stuff. When he came back, it wasn't easy. I didn't even know that I would stay married to him, and he knew that. But the one thing I prayed to God over and over about Daniel was that he would change his heart, and that if he did, that I would see it clearly and I would know. Only then I would stay in this marriage. And guess what? He did. Daniel was a completely transformed person. Yet I had big trust issues to overcome in our marriage, and I had no idea how to respect and trust the man who had betrayed me. God and I did a lot of talking during this time. He showed me I didn't have to trust him or respect him, my husband, with my emotions, but that I needed to act in such a way that would bring honor to God. Treating Daniel with respect would bring God honor. So I learned that respect towards my husband was a symbol of me respecting God and honoring him. And because God knows better, this paid off. I thought it would take me years to trust Daniel again, truly trust him. But God made miracles in me too. He had to. If he wanted to keep us married, he had transformed my husband almost instantly. And therefore, I needed to adjust to this new person's mindset and lifestyle, and pronto, which was a very, very different lifestyle. So he transformed me too. It wasn't so obvious or so mind-blowing to the naked eye, but just as real. No more drinking, no more going out to bars, no more going out dancing or hanging out with the same old friends. The fun things we did now were mostly in form of Bible studies, small groups, worship sessions at the church, and theological discussions. In the midst of it all, within a few months, I regained trust. And I learned to love him, to choose to love him even when I didn't want to, and to love him in the ways that God intended for wives to love their husbands. And I had no idea what that was before. I learned so much. I had been so childish, such a fool. I had no idea. It turns out I wasn't such a great wife. I didn't know how to respect him or admire him, and I was so critical of him, just like I learned growing up. I had a lot of work to do. Daniel and I renewed our vows only a few months later in Israel. A last-minute trip prompted by our pastor Brandon, even though Daniel had spent all our money previously in his addiction. We got a credit card and bought tickets, and we had that fresh debt. We did this as an act of faith, as we knew this was very important for our marriage, and we trusted that God would provide to pay for it. God has been so, so good, and he provided. Not just provided, he was so generous. He provided abundantly with my job, with Daniel's business, and then with the biggest blessing in our lives, our twin daughters. Faith and Hope, they're now almost 5. This was the second part of my dream, to become a mom. Pregnancy was really hard. We started out with triplets. I almost fell off of the bed when the ultrasound person told us. We did lose a kiddo. She didn't make it so far, but I was still heartbroken. Though I didn't really talk about it, I lost my baby. But twins were coming, and I had so much joy in that. It was a hard pregnancy, though. I had surgery at 19 weeks pregnant, and at 23 weeks, I broke waters. And this was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. I thought for sure I would lose all of them. And at this moment, Philippians 4:6 became a pillar for me. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. My pregnancy continued, but God's mercy and hardship didn't stop there. I did almost 6 weeks of complete bed rest in a hospital, and finally a C-section in 28 weeks. That's almost 3 months before due time. And the twins arrived. There were still more complications. Faith barely made it several times and ended up with multiple scary surgeries. But she is one healthy, feisty little girl now. The last few years have been busy, learning to raise little girls and learning to grow in my journey with God and my husband. There's always something to work on. First was forgiving, then codependency, then there was trust, then respect, then anxiety, then sacrifice, then anger, then obedience. Well, and it keeps going. There is always something. About a year ago, I learned that I have an underlying issue that really can be deadly to my soul. Since little, I bought this lie that I am not worth much, that I am not talented enough or good enough. But really, it is not true. It is a lie. But it took me a very long time to see that it was a lie. Now I am working on this constant state of hurry to do more and quickly, and this leads me to become impatient and very short-tempered. This is what God and I are currently working on. About 2 years ago, I came back to CR as I felt called to serve alongside Daniel. I threw myself in and I started serving in small groups, step studies, and sponsoring, also helping with the designing media. I love it. It is both an honor and a joy. This whole journey, this romantic journey, it wasn't about a man. It was about God and me. It was a love story. It still is the most beautiful one there is, and the story God had for me to get to know Him and to seek Him, to love Him, and to let Him be part of me, and for me to grow in this life knowing Him. It is the perfect love story, better than I ever dreamed or fantasized about. A story He has for everybody, including you. God was my true love all along. But He also showed me that He created a man just for me, one that made entirely perfectly and imperfectly for me, and of whom I grew to be immeasurably proud of, and I admire deeply, my husband. I have no regrets anymore, because I know I am at God's will, and He works for me and in me for good. No matter how hard I made it for Him, like a rebellious child to his parent, He loves me unconditionally, and He has a better plan ahead. A better story is still to be revealed, and I'm a work in progress. I don't know what your story looks like, but I'm pretty sure it involves true love too. If you're still trying to figure out what God is doing in your life, or if you're just feeling lost, or maybe unloved, or too hurt, too angry, or you're not even sure of what's wrong yet, there is something broken perhaps, you are in the right place. Keep seeking. Join a small group. Keep listening to the messages and engage people. Do not do this alone. One thing is clear to me. I need people in my life to help me through anything I go through. With conversation and confession, with humility and with prayer, with advice and correction, with encouragement and comfort. We all need this. I am so grateful for Celebrate Recovery and to walk along all of my CR sisters and brothers, as well as my church family. Thank you all for being there. Thank you all for sharing your stories and your experiences with me. I got to learn and grow so much because of it, and that's why I can be here today to share my story. Thank you for letting me share.
There is nothing like the story of a life transformed. hearing a story when you know it really well just makes it all the more potent and real. That can apply to our own stories. First, please drop some love for the testimony into the comments. The human being has not been created that will not double back and look at that later. Please share with them what their story has meant to you. If you have a moment to talk to them, let them know just how much their heart means to your heart and your walk. And again, if you want to honor this person, or any of the other testimonies you've heard, or the fallen heroes that have helped build this nation, or the person of Jesus Christ in his ultimate sacrifice on the cross, be willing to walk into your own weakness. That's how to do it. Be willing to jump into that space that scares you. Take a little step. For our testimony to get up here and share that was huge. If you've never done something like that, you don't know. And the first time you do, it's terrifying. What scares you? What's that step for you? Maybe it's not going to a small group. Maybe you do that all the time. Maybe you lead one of our small groups. Maybe you need to write your testimony. Let's talk. Maybe you want to step into greater service and help lead one of the small groups because you've been doing this for a while and you've previously finished a step study. Let's talk. Maybe you're excited for how this ministry can work moving forward in your life. Let's talk. This works when we do life together, when we communicate together. So we got to make that happen. In this season, where we have all this camera work and these online messages, we have to be very intentional about taking steps to connect to each other. And that's why it's so important that you come into one of these small groups. Our Celebrate Recovery Crisis Response small groups, you can see them listed below. Someone will drop them in the comments on Facebook or on YouTube. And men with men, women with women. Let one of our leaders know that you want to participate in one of these groups, and they'll happily get you the information and get you connected to people, because that's where this happens. That's where it's happened for all of us that's grabbed onto this thing. And if you want to take the steps forward, that's where that can start to happen for you. Whether it's just to invite people into your life and start doing this, not in total isolation, or whether it's to become the leader God's calling you to be and start to sponsor and serve others. Guys, we do this together, or not as all. And as always, it's an absolute privilege to walk with you. Please give some love to the testimony, and we'll see you soon.